Shabbat Shalom. 50 years and 1 day ago, Congregation Starr gathered in this very room to celebrate Shabbat and to mark the bar mitzvah of Stephen Frank. It was, I imagine, a Shabbat like so many others before and since. Goldie Adler, now of blessed memory, stood in the doorway of the Adlers' attractive brick ranch with the two older grandchildren, Judith, 8, and Jeremy, 5, and watched as her husband, Rabbi Morris Adler, walked through the gray morning toward our magnificent synagogue edifice, a mere 2 blocks away. February 12th was the birthday of Abraham Lincoln, a man deeply admired by the rabbi. The weather was unseasonably warm that day, with the temperature near 40 degrees. A light mixture of rain and snow fell much of that morning. Services began at 9 a.m., as they still do today. That first chair there belonged to Rabbi Adler. Next to him, where Larry's sitting, sat the bar mitzvah boy. And in the third chair sat Congregational President Mr. Lou Berry. On this side of the bima sat Cantor Jacob Sonnenklar and Cantor Ruvain Frankel. Rabbi Groner was away that day, participating in a retreat at Camp Tamarack. Joining the congregational members in shul that morning were the family and friends of the bar mitzvah, along with 125 visitors, including several school children from various churches in the area. Eventually, Mrs. Adler arrived, with her 2 grandchildren in tow. The morning progressed like any other morning. Getting close to noon, the rabbi finished his sermon on the theme of Lincoln's assassination and returned to his seat next to the bar mitzvah boy. Cantor Frankel began to chant the closing prayers. It was at that moment that a troubled young man ascended the bima, gun in hand. 50 years and 1 day ago. Some of you were children at that time, busy in another room with junior congregation. Some of you were 12 years old, watching the service intently, with thoughts of your own bar mitzvah coming down the road. Some of you were businessmen, lawyers, and entrepreneurs. Perhaps there that day, or maybe that was the one Shabbat you were out of town. You were old enough to develop a relationship with the rabbi, but a friendship steeped in respect and even admiration. Some of you were doctors who in the prime of your career were forced to rush up the bima to care for a fallen spiritual leader, revered beyond description. Others of you were forced to watch in horror the tragedy that shook a community, a movement, a nation, before fleeing the room. And still others of you were nowhere near Starr, maybe not yet members or even yet born. But you've heard about that day, 50 years ago. Is the bar mitzvah boy okay? I heard that the rabbi asked while himself a victim. The rabbi even had the presence of mind to comfort his wife Goldie and to try to assure her that he would be okay. It's an understatement to declare that life changes significantly in 50 years. Many of the children then have become parents today of their own adult children. And some of those who were children then have since become grandparents. Those who were parents then 50 years ago have become grandparents, maybe even great-grandparents. We all have a few more gray hairs than we did then. Perhaps your health now is not what it once was. Perhaps you've lost parents along the way, or spouses, or tragically, children. Perhaps you've built careers upon which you take great pride. Perhaps you worked a job and are now enjoying retirement. Perhaps you tended to a home, raised a family, and now find joy in spending time with friends and extended family. Perhaps you look upon the world and your life and you ask, where did the years go? For most of human history, a half-century was an eternity. In the Torah times, our ancestors had been journeying for only about a year when Moses sent out scouts to search the promised land. 10 of the 12 scouts came back with a report skeptical as to our ancestors' chances of conquering Israel. Faithlessness spread like wildfire among the Israelite encampment, and God grew incensed. In punishment, God sentenced our ancestors to 39 more years of wandering. It took only a matter of days to take the Israelites out of Egypt. It took 40 years to take Egypt out of the Israelites. In the days of the Torah, 40 years equaled a generation. One generation died out and another grew up. 50 years, a jubilee, was longer than a generation. Until the 18th century, really, with the age of the Enlightenment, 50 years meant little in the world, short of those births and deaths. During those 1,000 years of humanity that preceded the modern era, one encountered little advancement over the course of a half-century. During the modern period, however, science led to knowledge. Knowledge led to philosophical and religious reformations. And those reformations in thought led to political revolutions. The world began to change a little faster. The 19th century saw the birth of industrialization, and the world began to change even faster. In the 20th century, it took 38 years for radio to reach 50 million users in the United States. Nearly the same time it took the generation of Israelite slaves to die out in the wilderness. In the case of computers, however, it took only 16 years to develop 50 million users. The internet reached 50 million users in 4 years. Computer power doubles every 18 months, and the internet doubles every year. The laptop computer I purchased a year ago is already outdated. Our access to information exceeds our ability to consume it. It is safe to say that more changes have occurred within and to our society over the last 50 years than perhaps the 500 years before that. When the world out there is changing faster than the world in here, in our mental and emotional responses, our environment becomes bewildering and threatening, remarks Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Rabbi Adler died in 1966. 3 years prior to that, Kennedy was assassinated. And 2 years after Rabbi Adler's death, in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was also murdered. And I don't have to recount for you what happened in the world thereafter. You lived it. The last 50 years have seen more technological advancements, scientific discoveries, and social upheaval than the human brain can comprehend. Sadly, or perhaps consequently, these last 50 years have also seen the breakdown of those institutions in social life which were supposed to nurture us through life's changes. Writer and futurist Alvin Toffler calls these institutions personal stability zones. One job for life, one marriage for life, and one geographic location for life. Of course, not everyone had them, but they weren't rare either. It was these personal stability zones that allowed us to cope with life's challenges and struggles. In a world of rushing water, we need rocks on which to grab for stability. Certainly then, it is no coincidence that God is referred to as Tzur Yisrael, Rock of Israel. And one of the most important personal stability zones remains the synagogue. For many of you, despite the great tragedy that occurred here 50 years ago, or maybe because of it, this building and this community are your family. This is where you come with parents or children, spouses or friends to mark life's milestones, and also to take a few moments to catch your breath from the torrent of water. This was and continues to be your sanctuary from life's storms. Which frankly makes what occurred on this bima 50 years ago that much more difficult to comprehend. For at least one Shabbat, the sanctuary was shattered. The week after the shooting, the congregation's leaders and Rabbi Erwin Groner summoned the strength to move our great shul forward, returning here to the sanctuary where the tragedy had befallen Rabbi Adler and the entire congregation the week before. Rabbi Groner, now of blessed memory, offered these words to a packed house. We come to the synagogue to seek a message. We come to the synagogue to find direction in our lost and confused condition. If you listen, you can hear a message, a task, a purpose, a duty. Search your hearts and you will discover it. We shall preserve that which madness wanted to destroy. Because there was hate here last week, we shall learn to love more deeply. Because there was fear here last week, we shall open the reservoirs of courage, a courage which will bring calmness and resolution and stability. Because there was divisiveness and disintegration, we shall reaffirm our shared ideals of truth, of justice, of peace. Because there was aggression here, we shall demonstrate our compassion, a compassion which strengthens and sustains and supports all those who wait by the side of Rabbi Adler, his family, who hope and pray for his healing and his restoration. It's safe to say, in my opinion, that more beautiful words were never spoken from this bema, before or since. With his community suffering and the trauma that invariably follows gun violence, the sting of uncontrolled mental illness, and the loss of a beloved father figure, Rabbi Groner called on the congregation to pursue love, courage, calm, stability, truth, justice, peace, and compassion. And in the days that followed the shooting, Mrs. Goldie Adler somehow found the strength to offer comfort and consolation to the family of the shooter. Rabbi Adler died on March 11, 1966. We'll mark his yahrzeit in 2 weeks' time with a special opportunity for memory and conversation on Sunday morning, February 28th. We will honor the rabbi's legacy the following Shabbat morning, March 5th. As we contemplate the meaning of a half-century, I'm reminded of that powerful message from the Bible to which we often turn when reflecting on time. Words made contemporary by a band called the Byrds 51 years ago. To everything there's a season, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Indeed, in 50 years, one sees, hears, and experiences life's fullest tapestry. Children become parents and even grandparents. Parents become grandparents and, God willing, great-grandparents. We lose parents, spouses, children, friends. We watch the world change before our very eyes. Yet in those 50 years, one of the few constants in life is this room. It's this community. It's the words of the Torah and the teachings of our tradition. What remains just as true today as it did 50 years ago is the congregation's desire, as Rabbi Groner eloquently explained, to pursue love, courage, calm, stability, truth, justice, peace, and compassion. 50 years. A jubilee. As we mark 50 years since that fateful day in February, and as we reflect on 50 years in our own lives, let us give thanks for the blessing of family and friendship, for community, and for continuity. Let us find joy in life's celebrations, and let us seek meaning in life's tragedies. In a world of rushing water, let us use this room and this community as rocks upon which to grab for stability. Finally, as we consider the implications of a half-century, let us remember that those sacred tasks laid out before us by Rabbi Morris Adler of blessed memory, and by Rabbi Erwin Groner of blessed memory. Let us remember that those sacred tasks remain our mission as a congregation and our purpose as a people. May God bless each of you and your families. May God continue to heal us and all the world from that wound inflicted 50 years ago. And may God bless Congregation Shaare Tzedek as we, its members, pursue paths of peace and of righteousness, paths of inspiration and transformation. We pray, may God be with us as we attempt together to live lives of gratitude, of obligation, and of joy. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say together, Amen.